you know, what's surprising about it is just, and it's surprising in a way that I expected. I'm always surprised by the number of people that Jack touched, the number of people who come up to me, who I wouldn't have thought, people in other lines of work come up to me saying, oh yeah, Jack really, I got a letter, after I interviewed Jack I got this letter from a kid going on and on about how Jack improves his work, and the guy was a spot welder. And he actually saw how Jack Kirby had encouraged him to be the best damn spot welder in the world. And I think, you know, Jack would have liked that. He would have been proud. Much more proud than if he'd gotten into comics. But the all-pervasive, the encompassing, as many times as I am made aware of Jack's impact, the ripple effect, where even people didn't know they were being impacted by him, or impacted by him, I still continue to be surprised by who I hear from, and how many people, and how intense their feeling towards this man was. We are now at the stage where Jack has now been on for 14 years. So there's a lot of people who are very heavy into comics who never had the chance to meet Jack. How many people here met Jack? Okay. There was a period of time when if you went to a San Diego convention and you cared enough to wait for 20 minutes, you could meet Jack. He was the most accessible guy in the world. All these people got to meet him and shake his hand and say how much they loved his work, and to hear some completely incoherent comment from him that you pretend was normal. And and then 3 years later you figure out, oh, that's what he did. But we're now at the point there's all these people coming up to me saying, I never had a chance to meet Jack. They want to shake my hand because my hand shook Jack's. And there's this, those of you who met Jack, people will be coming up to you the rest of your life saying, you really actually, honest to God, met Jack. I met Groucho Marx, and I felt privileged that way. I met, I met a lot of very important people who are no longer with us, and who affected people's lives, who had impact that way. And it's the same way with Jack. This is something we'll carry around. It doesn't make us any better. It just makes people envious. And they all say, what was he like? He's like Jack. He's this short, little, tough guy with a New York accent, whose mind raced from, I tell people, most people's brains, they start with A, they go to B, they go to C. Jack would start with C, then he'd do A, then he'd do R, then he'd do W, then he'd be on beyond zebra. He'd invent whole new letters to get to them. And at some point, it made enormous sense. And it's just amazing. To this day, I'm amazed how many times I was walking down the street and suddenly something Jack said to me in 1973, you'll suddenly go, oh yeah, okay. I get it now. It applies now. Around 1972 or 73, Jack said at the San Diego convention, someday this type of convention had 3,000 people. We thought that was a big deal. Roy, come on up. And you all know Roy Thomas, everybody? And Jack said, someday this convention, San Diego convention, is going to take over the entire city of San Diego. And it's going to be huge, and everybody in town will be from San Diego, and it'll be there, and it'll be where Hollywood comes every year to sell the movies they made last year and to find out what movies they're going to make next year. That's what's happening. Did he really? He said that, yes, he did. And you all know Joe Sinnott, ladies and gentlemen? And Mr. Stan Goldberg. And somebody stick another chair up here in case Dick Ayers shows up. Yeah. Invited him. He's going upstairs. Dick invited him to the other one. Dick never showed up. Dick is making the deal. Oh, there's. All right. None of us would tell. I do the same stories. Are you starting right now? Some of these people are right here. Are you going to start right now? I'm going to start right now. Okay. I've got a quorum. I've got a minion.
I wanted an autograph.
No, you don't. What?
I wanted an autograph. I'm waiting 40 years to ask for an autograph.
Ask Roy for his autograph?
Yes.
We'll take a moment here. Get Roy's
Because I'm
autograph.
going to have to leave by.
Yeah.
More, is that a part of here? Oh, Barry, yeah, right. We have to.
Oh, that's not one yet. One
For all that help. I got the position to move to Walmart.
Roy, just hold like this. All right, good afternoon. I'm Mark Evanier. That makes this officially a Jack Kirby panel. People in the back, if you can't hear someone, would you wave to me and tell me if you can't hear? Otherwise, I'm going to presume you hear. I keep doing these panels at conventions about Jack because otherwise, I go to conventions and people talk to me about Jack all the time. And it's nice to get everybody together and all the Kirby fans in the room together because we are, after all, the classiest, smartest ones at the convention. And to talk to some of the people who had the pleasure of working with Jack, contributing to his life and his career, and being a part of all that. I think you all know what all these gentlemen did over the years. I'm going to ask each of them. I'm going to talk. Roy's going to have to leave early, so I'm going to talk to him first and such. And I'll tell you a little bit later about some of the new Kirby projects that are coming up. If you're one of those people who feels they have to buy everything, boy, are you going to be spending a lot of money in the next year. I am in, just briefly, I am in, one of the reasons I'm in New York is on Sunday, Monday rather, I am meeting with Joe Simon to pick out, finalize the contents of a book that Harry and Abrams Publishing is going to bring out, the first volume of Simon and Kirby material. You know, in my book, we printed a Fighting American story off the original art. White out, smudges, paste-ups and all. And they're putting together a book which is going to be 350 pages of Simon and Kirby artwork printed off the original art, a little larger page size. Joe has all this stuff in storage, and plus I'm borrowing some from some collectors, and it's going to be coming out first of several volumes. Before that, Titan Books is putting out a book which I'm also very looking forward to, which is kind of a Simon and Kirby story showcase, some of the best Simon and Kirby stories, including stuff they did for DC and Marvel. The book from Abrams is going to be all stuff from Black Magic, Fighting America, all the non-DC Marvel stuff. And the Titan book is going to include some DC and Marvel stories. And it would be a kind of a history of Joe's work with Jack, and some of the stuff that Joe did also on his own in both cases. And suddenly there's this new flurry of interest. Everything Jack did is going to get reprinted one of these days. In the next few years, with the possible exception of something like 2001, where there's a rights encumbrance. Maybe that'll return someplace. Anyway, let me ask each of these people a couple of questions briefly. So I'm going to start with Roy here. Roy, you were a witness to an enormous part of Marvel history, and you were there when Jack and Stan were doing what is arguably their finest work together. What can you tell us about what went on in that office when those guys were plotting stuff together? And Saul Brodsky said that he used to claim that Stan would actually jump up on the desks and strike poses. Is this true?
I myself never saw Stan jump up on the desk. The Salvia Simmons saw him, and a lot of other people did. Maybe Stan Goldberg, I can tell you. But I never. I mean, he would be very agitated and go around. I didn't. You know, I expect him to. He was getting a little older by that stage. So one time, a couple of years after I got there, he was only in his 40s, but he jumped up to click his heels with his, not there, but with his wife at a dinner. I remember that. He was walking. He terribly sprained an ankle or something. He was walking around on crutches for a couple of weeks. But, you know, he was kind of irrepressible. I don't think I ever really witnessed Stan and Jack talk about a story, or not at length, maybe a few words here and there. They tend to do that in cars on the way home or over the phone. I used to have to sit down on a couple of meetings with Ramita and so forth, but not much with Jack, maybe a couple of times. I was there for one of the more infamous things that ever happened to Stan and Jack, that the reporter for the Herald Tribune article that time, I was there for a lot of that, and I saw Jack just sitting there being Jack and not doing anything, and Stan just being agitated but not jumping on a table or delivering Jack. And when the article came out a week or two later, Stan was almost as livid as Jack, because especially once Jack didn't know how livid he was, understandably, I think, because it made it look like Stan was the prince and Jack was this clown, and that's not what Stan intended or what actually I think was there. This reporter was trying so hard to make Stan and Barbara look good that Jack, the idea of thinking of Jack as somebody who just sort of sit there and not contribute anything, it just shows how little the guy knew, right? He obviously couldn't see anything past what he wanted to see, and so I don't know if I'm happy or sad to have witnessed that, because I consider it like one of the real nails in the coffin of their relationship. But it was such a thrill occasion to get lucky enough to be at a lunch with Stan and Jack and Ramita, Saul Grassi, 5 or 6 of us. I wasn't at many of those. I do remember one thing Jack said at one of them that came back to remind me later. He said, I think he was talking to Ramita or somebody, as much say, or Saul, and he was saying, I do this, one of the next big things, when somebody turns around and really revolutionizes comics, it's not going to be Marvel, or it's not going to be DC or this, that. It's going to be a couple of guys in a garage somewhere come up with an idea. And I thought of that when, Ninja Turtles became so big. That was almost a classic case of what Jack was talking about. He was not an organized thinker, I don't think particularly, but he was a visionary, and you have to make all the allowances for crazy genius, that you make for anybody, but you have to make them all for Jack. And Stan was sort of a genius sort of in his own way, but he was organized. The two of them together, I think, were even better than the two of them apart, and that was pretty formidable.
Saul said that frequently what happened was that Jack would come in and they'd talk over an issue of Fantastic Four, and they'd send Jack home to draw an issue of Fantastic Four, and Jack would go home and draw an issue of Thor. And back would come the story, and it wouldn't hook up with the end of the previous continued story.
Many's the time that Stan, I remember, you remember that it was a S.H.I.E.L.D. story, I think, in which he starts off with this wild west robot, and he's going around and guns are shooting, and Stan said, look at this, that son of a bitch, he says. He draws this beautiful page of this robot on page 1, and you turn the page and he's nowhere. Jack throws away all these ideas and doesn't follow through. But of course that was, once Jack had drawn that one picture, he didn't have much interest. It wasn't really part of the plot. And of course, and somehow or other, either Stan would love what Jack did, or he would not understand how Jack could possibly have done this because he misunderstood everything we talked about. He's done this whole story, and then Stan would try to write the story he wanted to do, and he would just make Jack mad because he was not writing the story that Jack wanted. And it's just amazing, that partnership. I always say the only thing you know about partnership is that when you ask them, each partner did 90% of the work. And that was true with Stan and Jack as much as it was with Simon and Kirby, or Siegel and Schuster probably, or almost any team.
Now, you started as assistant editor to Stan, and then you graduated to editor of the company. In between there was a period when you were kind of editor without the title. At least of your own books, if not of many others.
That's all I
All right. Now, you had working for you at that time a lot of pretty dependable guys. All right? How often was Joe sent out late with stuff?
Well, I thought Joe Sinnott was probably this band of elves out on the island somewhere, because it came in like clockwork. But and Stan Goldberg, Jack. These were people that were at Ditko. They were so dependable that when something happened and anybody except Frank Giacoia was late, it was really a cause for amazement. The only one you could ever depend on to always be late was Frank Giacoia, because he would commit himself to 5 jobs, and he could only work on 2 or 3 at a time. Jack was, like John Ray was talking on the other panel. You'd say you needed something done, a couple days later you had it. The joke I had about the Fantastic Four was that Martin Goodman said, I want a team book, Stan went home and then he thought about something, and he tells Jack Kirby about the Fantastic Four, and I said, and 2 days later, you know, Stan had the book on his desk. I said, oh, it would have been one day that Jack's pencil broke. You know, and that's about the way they worked. It was just amazing, and it was good. You know, there was nobody ever faster, you know, as fast and doing great work that Jack than I ever saw, except maybe to some extent John DeSima, but of course he wasn't the imaginative genius, good as he was, that Jack was.
Joe, were you ever late with anything in your life? Ever late with anything?
Well, 58 years I've been in the business, 58 years with Stan, and not once was I ever late with anything. I almost missed the deadline when I was on something with Jim Steranko one year. He was just starting out at Marble, and I worked Christmas Day, and that was one day I would never work, but I had to work on one of Steranko's stories. Could have been Captain America or Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., I forget, but I worked Christmas Day on it. But no, I've never been late or never missed a deadline.
My wife will never let me work on Christmas Day. I beg her to.
Joe, tell us about inking Jack. How different was it inking Jack from anybody else? What was there about his work?
Well, the reason I like working with Jack, he did, well, for many years we worked on the big pages, for example, and Jack would do like maybe 4 panels through a page, and each panel was like a splash page, and it gave me a chance to use a brush. I used to love working with a brush, and on Kirby's stuff you could really just knock the stuff out, and I did Jack's work, I was very quick on Jack's work. I did about 3 pages a day, unless there was a machine that took, you know, an hour or 2 hours to do. But Jack's stuff was very easy to ink, the easiest of all the pencilers I ever worked with. And like I said, especially when we worked on the big pages, especially because I could work with a brush. But he was just a pleasure to work with. The stuff was so simple. You know, it was very cartoony, but it was so bold, which I liked, especially, you know, working with a brush. We got some decent effects.
All right, Alan?
Okay.
Oh.
Yes, I know. So you people in the back were
Okay,
supposed to tell
okay.
me that.
All that went for naught?
Now they heard it not as loudly as they liked it. Now I know the answer to this. How much contact did you have with Jack during the work on the Fantastic Four?
What was it again?
How much contact did you have with Jack during the time doing the Fantastic Four?
All the work I ever did with Jack, he never once ever called me, never once commented on what I was doing, never once criticized my work, never once said, Joe, you're doing a good job. I just never communicated with Jack at all in all the years I ever worked with him. And I think I only spoke to him maybe twice on the telephone, even after he had gone to California. And, you know, was semi-retired actually.
When I met Joe in 1970, and I relayed a couple of comments back and forth between the two of them. And Jack just said, I don't have to tell Joe anything, he does everything right. When did you finally meet Jack?
I remember he called me one time. It could have been you. And he wanted me to ink. He asked me if I would ink a Fighting American for him. And of course, I couldn't turn him down. I loved working on his stuff. And so I did the Fighting American. And he called me up, or maybe you did.
I dialed the phone and put him on. Yeah.
Right, and he wanted to know how much I was going to charge, and I said, nothing, Jack. I said, just do a drawing. My son Mark was about 11 years old then, and he's 47 today. But hi, Mark. So, in any case, I said, do a thing for Mark. I said, during your lunch break. And so he did me a nice, or for Mark, I should say, a nice Cisco thing, cowboy outfit and everything on in pencil. And it was so good that I had to ink it, and I colored it. And Mark's got a lot of things, but that's his treasure. He wouldn't get rid of that for nothing. And So little things like that.
That was a drawing that was done for the Kirby Unleashed portfolio in 1971 we did. It was a color insert drawing. Now, for those of you who don't know, Stan Goldberg is one of the top artists for Archie and has been for many years. At Marvel in the 60s, he drew Millie the Model and a lot of those kind of books. But he was also Marvel's colorist for a long time on many other books. And he colored all the early issues. This is the man who decided to make the Hulk green. And many other things. Now, Stan, you got to observe. Make sure the mic is on. Is your mic on?
Is it on?
No. There's a switch. There's a switch like that. Turn it up.
Repeat. Try this one.
Hello, hello, hello. Yes, there you go. There you go.
Okay.
Knock water here. Spread the table.
Now, Stan, you got to observe the Lee and Kirby team in action occasionally up at the office. Tell us what you remember about those guys.
I remember when I was in San Diego a few years ago, and it was on this similar panel, and there's one story I told at that particular time, and I think I told it a few times after that, but it's a story I'd love to tell because it's really a true story when you think about it, how we relied on Jack so much as an artist. You know, he was the boss, you know, boss of this, and the boss is the boss. So when Frank, I'd go out to lunch sometimes, and maybe Frank J. Coy would be around, and Jack would join us for lunch, and lunch could be a crazy thing. He would come up with ideas, and while I'm eating my hamburger, that was kind of strange. We always thought it was strange, but got it from Jack, and you believed it. It could be done. You know, divorced nuns living in Coney Island, you know, one of those type of things. But the story goes with going out with Frank Giacoya and Jack Kirby, and we had fun. We had to cross, the office was on Madison Avenue, and we go back to Lexington Avenue to have some lunch, and there was, the traffic goes north and south. And we were kidding around and knew how valuable an artist Jack was to the company. And I would say, I don't know who started, either I did or Frank did say, Goldberg, you stand on the left side so we could protect them from any cars that are going downtown. And we cross over on the right, the cars are going uptown, you stand on that side. If a car hits us, they'll hit us first and we'll protect Jack from crossing the street. And we had some fun with that. And there's so many other little stories that came about. Another one was on a Monday morning, sometimes we would come home with some work, and Stan had me there for a whole week for something, but there was Jack bringing in some work. And like I always call his stories the end of the world. And the end of the world is not nobody living in the world, everybody is still around at the end of the world on Jack's stories. But and then he also told me his house was getting painted. And then they were painting his studio, wherever he worked. And he had set up his drawing board on the banister, on the railing. You know, the staircase goes down, but there's another railing up on top. He just put his drawing board on top of that railing. I don't know if it was a light on the ceiling or light coming from the bedroom or whatever. And he did another one of the end of the world stories. And you look at this and, you know, it's again, I couldn't compare him at that time. I've been in business a long time, and I know a lot of artists, a lot of great artists, but there always that one person comes along who proceeds and just takes over in so many respects. And Jack was just one of them. You know, I could compare this artist with, I love when he draws, this guy does Western, and this guy does this and that. But Jack could do everything. His romance stories, I mean, they're not as pretty as a Don Heck romance story or a John Romita great romance story, but they were Jack Kirby's romance stories, and they stood out by themselves. They were just marvelous drawings. I love the style. I never get tired of the book that Mark did this year and the book that came out of tomorrow's. I mean, I take it with me when I'm having my breakfast or lunch. I devour a couple of pages, and then I put it aside, put a mark in it, and know where I end off and where I could start lunchtime and looking at it again 100 times over. Out of all the books that I've gotten, you know, it's good being an artist. You get these free books all the time, and it's fun. But the book on Jack is a book on Jack. You know, that's just about it. He did something. I don't know if it wasn't your book or the one that came out tomorrow. He did the 6-page story of him growing up on the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
Which was that yours?
That was in my book, yeah, it's called Street Codes.
That blew, and he did it, and it hung, it supposedly hung in his wife's, all the pages hung on the floor, on the walls in the house. I keep looking at that artwork. I think that is the best pictorial scenes of a period in New York history no photograph could ever capture. What he captured was pencil and maybe, I heard he never used an eraser, I was never aware of that, but there it was, the walls. I see them, something in an old photograph that goes back to the turn of the century, the Lower East Side really existed. The tenements, the streetcars, the pushcars and all that, and the gangs that existed then. And he did it all for 6 pages, and it was a true history. And those 6 pages, it just blew my mind. So again, this artist that I read, John Buscema, was another dear friend, and I thought one of the best guys. Not one of the best. I sometimes said the best guy, but then I think of Jack and John Buscema would always say, well, he's the best, no question about it. So if John said that, I agreed with him, and whatever, it was a great time.
Jack did use an eraser, and the most often place he used it was to take out an entire panel and do an entirely different panel. You get a scene done, and you go, that's not the picture I wanted to draw. I can draw a better picture. And he would take the entire thing out. He didn't usually use an eraser to fix an arm or a leg. He just used it to just erase the whole panel.
I think that's one of the reasons that he could never do corrections. Stan used to but just say, I can't get Jack to do corrections, whether he was on the East Coast, the West Coast, because he'd say, he'll just do the same drawing again and everything, and that's probably why he had it. Because the feeling that we had, I used to discuss with Gil Kane, who of course was an inveterate Kirby watcher and fan, and he'd say that, when Jack draws it, he's already seen it in his head. He's just putting down on the panel what he sees, which is what a lot of artists do. With Jack, you got the feeling it was almost exact. And therefore, if he didn't like it, he wasn't going to be able to draw an arm a little differently or a leg a little differently. He may as well start over because he's already drawn what's there, and anything else would be a falsification, so he just starts all over.
Yeah. I used to, for years, people used to come up to me and say, let's do a book of Jack's preliminary roughs. And I said, there really aren't very many. In my book, I printed a cover rough he did for the cover of Tales of Asgard #1, a Thor cover. That's, I think, the only cover sketch I've ever seen from that period. He did a bunch of them for DC in the 70s because Infantino insisted on cover roughs. And frequently Jack would do it, he would draw the cover, and then he'd draw a rough and send it in. And he'd send the cover in. Because he just thought of a picture. But the thing that Jack liked doing covers the least of any part of his job, because there was never a good time to do the cover. If you asked me to do the cover before you do the inside of the issue, we hadn't figured out the story yet, or figured out the visuals for it yet, so there was no point doing the cover then. If you asked me to do it after the story was done, he couldn't remember the story. If Jack finished the story at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and started another one at 3, he could not tell you what he had drawn and finished at 2 to save his life. And if you asked me to do the cover in the middle of the process of the story, you were interrupting his story. So there was just no good time to do them. He was actually pretty happy when they started having other people design the covers or do them. It didn't bother him that much to have somebody else have that big problem. Because he thought of himself as a storyteller more than as an artist. Stan, this is maybe sound like a stupid question, but I'm entitled to a few. Did you color Jack's work any differently than you might have colored somebody else? Did the work demand a certain coloring approach?
This industry has changed, and some artists have become prima donnas or superstars. Jack was never a superstar, not in his eyes, and not even in our eyes. He was Jack Kirby. It was become to get what he was bringing in, and sometimes we said, oh, wow, look at this, or look at that, and sometimes it was just, okay, move the pages over, or what else is coming in, or I get a batch of books. Some months we had, our schedule was 51 books came out on a schedule. That's a lot of books, and sometimes we got away from 64 pages, it was 48 pages, 32, whatever, but it was all lumped into one big package of books, and never thought of it. You come to expect Jack to do the job. I can't say, wow, look at this, and maybe a particular panel or whatever, but it was, No, it was no, just as the years passed and everything that came out and things you started to see it with not different eyes, but the situation of sitting back and, you know, getting a little older and respecting certain artwork, or maybe, I no. The answer is no. There's a long answer, the answer is no.
All right.
Steve Ditko was another one, Don. They all fit into when you get a Ditko story, a Don Heck story, and right down the line, you know. And then some books that had 3 or 4 different artists in the books, you know, the mystery books that, you know, different. I go back to, you know, 1949 or 50 when the books were, half of them weren't signed and a lot of stuff. And then when the monsters started coming, the covers with all those guys coming out of the middle of the ground, with all strange names and then, you know, how things happen. And you said a bunch of guys in the garage getting together and coming up with the greatest thing that, greatest story ever told. I know sometimes I do something and then I figured I have to give him this particular, whatever it is, and give him just another drawing just off the top of my head. I should give him 2. You know, this one took me 30 seconds. I'll give him one 40 seconds. Well, the 40-second one works, and that's the one I thought I wasn't even going to put in the package. And it's hard to say that what we did, what we work on, that's going to be the big star, and what we do as a throwaway becomes the super. I can't think of it any other way.
During the 60s, the Marvel superhero books were generally colored brighter than the DC superhero books. More yellows, more bright, warm colors. These you guys stay away from the olive greens.
I was just talking to, reminiscing about the DC books, the war books that came out of DC, drawn by
Jeff Davis?
No, not Davis, the other guy. Kurtzman. And Marie Severin was the colorist there. And all their books, even their other stuff. And then we hired, I think something happened with the code or whatever, so Stan was able to hire Marie. And Stan was telling me, Marie's coming. I said, you know, great, you know, I love those books. But then when she started doing some coloring that she was doing over the books that came out of EC, all the great Severin books and Davis books and Kurtzman and people like that, he hated the coloring. He hated it because our art couldn't take that style of art. It was much more in your face. Our stuff was, and our stuff was different than DC also. DC, they crossed every T and dotted every I. And our books, half the I's were, we crossed the I's and dotted the T's, I think. And it was fine. And I think that's what made our books successful. They were down-home books, and I love them. But getting back to the EC books, so Marie, then he said, she's not doing any more coloring. Goldberg got her books back again. He said, thanks a lot, you know. The 51 times, I thought I got a break, you know. So drawing some Marvel Tales books, which I really want to do. And then he told me, I want you to do a teenage book. And somebody was looking down on me in 1957. And I said, I'll draw a teenage book, but under duress, because you have to give me a horror story to draw after I draw a teenage book. And I drew a teenage book, and I've been drawing teenage books since, but that's another story. That's Goldberg. One of these days we'll have a panel up here talking about Goldberg. So that's, I don't know where I was going, but it was a different time. The only thing similar is something you hold in your hand with, like people would say, a bubble above a picture. I said it's blown over a picture, you know, and it's pictures and it's words and it's a comic book. It's a comic book. It's not a graphic novel. It's a comic book. Call it whatever you want. People meet me after 40, 50 years and they say to me, you still drawing funny books? You still drawing joke books? You know, that's what they call them. When I grew up, I was reading joke books. Even though it was Young Allies or books like that, it was drawing joke books. And Jack had been drawing them forever, I think. Forever. And as you're talking about Simon and Kirby, I can't wait to see that book. It's just stuff from that era, what both him and Joe Simon and he did. Because that, to draw like that, how old was he when he was about 20?
Jack was born in 1917.
Right.
Yeah, so.
What a talent.
Yeah.
I appreciate him.
I want to stick Roy with a few more questions before he has to leave. Roy, when you went to work for Stan, and you worked for Mort Weisinger for a whopping week and a half or something like that, and you wanted to be at Marvel. You wanted to be over there.
Oh, I wanted to be at DC. It's just that.
And Mort Weisinger didn't.
But Mort Weisinger was there, and if I'd been working maybe for Julie Schwartz or somebody, maybe it would have worked out. The luckiest thing ever happened to me is that Mort was what he was, because otherwise I would have never had the nerve, to leave. But I was so miserable there that when Stan met me and he stands out looking out the window and not at me and says, what do we have to do to hire you away from DC? After I'd taken this little writer's test, which we never discussed. And I said, you just have to offer me a job, for the same sum that, I did lie. I told him the sum that Mort had offered me, which he had then reneged on by $10 when I got to New York. And I would have gone for either of them, and so forth. He said, okay, that's it, Then I had to go back and tell Mort I was quitting. But, I'd always wanted to work for DC, but then I never thought that, it looks like Stan was writing everything, and who knew that he wanted to, and he had 10 books, who knew that he didn't want to write them all? So, I would have been content to work for DC forever. Once I got in there, I was really lucky because there was only 5 or 6 of us, so it was a nice, pleasant, different kind of situation, and I think I kind of thrived in it, and I was very lucky.
Now, when you went on staff there, Stan had tried other people out writing stories, and some of them had lasted a whopping 2 or 3 stories. Some of them didn't last any. About half a dozen people had failed in that job before you clicked in it. What did you get that they didn't get?
I don't know. I really don't, because the people before and after me, really bright. The person who was there for 2 weeks before me, Steve Skates, did a lot of fine work. The person that came, the next one that I got in there, I guess, was Denny O'Neill. Certainly a fine, writer, but he and Stan never really were on the same wavelength. I don't know, because, my idols in the thing, well, much as I liked Stan and thought Stan's writing was the best in comics, I had no doubt about that at the stage, but still my influences were those old stories by John Broome and Kanigher and Gardner Fox and people like that. And, I had never thought about writing comics quite that way. I enjoyed reading them, but I didn't think in terms of writing them. I tended to think more like a Gardner Fox or John Broome. And now suddenly I had to start thinking in a little different terms, and it was kind of a challenge. But I had this great teacher, because here I was, I'd been teaching high school for 4 years and hated it. That's the idea of the horror movie is to wake up as a high school teacher, or any other kind. My wife likes to do, I don't. But Stan, who, had to go to work out of high school, he was a really good teacher. And, he would tell me why he did this and why he did that. And sometimes he'd get a little stirred and he could lose his temper, like anybody else. Nothing was idyllic, but I was really lucky. I'd be standing there, Saul Brasnick in his right hand and me on his left, and he'd go over Jack's pencil. You talk about what did you look at Jack's work different from the other? A lot of us, and Marie and I was one of them. Anytime we got a chance, it always went directly to Stan. But if we got a chance to look at Jack's pencils that came in, nobody was going to look at Steve's pencils, so they didn't look like anything. There was nothing there because he was going to ink it. But with Jack, you could look at those full pencils and just love it. And once in a while, Stan would, once in a while he'd complain because Jack didn't follow the story, he felt whatever it was. But, but mostly, of course, are introduced too many characters, but mostly he was really in awe. I remember that time he called me and said, look at this crazy character that Jack just threw into our story here. About this guy Galactus, he throws in this guy called the Surfer, just flying around through space. It's a great character. I'm sure it said just the Surfer, and Stan and he together made out of that the Silver Surfer, mostly Jack's creation visually and conceptually. And but Stan was the number one fan of Jack. It's just that he also had to be the boss, and sometimes those two things get in the way. But I was just in awe of that, of Jack's work when he come in. In a way, I never felt otherwise, much as I liked other artists, except once in a while with Colin, and a lot in the early days with Buscema. Those were the guys that you just wanted to see everything they did that came in. But as good as the other guys were, and there were a lot of good ones.
On another one of these panels years ago, John Buscema was talking about how he kind of learned how to do Marvel Comics from Jack. Jack sat him down and gave him some pointers. His first few jobs were rough, and finally he caught on. And Don had talked extensively about how Jack taught him and things like that. What did you see around the office of Jack teaching other artists, directly or indirectly?
It must have all taken place in a closet. No, probably out of Jack's house or their house, because I never saw him talk to anybody about anything. Gil Kane always said, when Jack came back in '75, And there were some people at Marvel that didn't really want him back, I understood, and Stan called me and says, you think Jack ought to come back? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I got a couple of guys around here who say what he is, but they really don't think I should let Jack come back. I said, well, don't let him write. You know, says, because I'm not sure. He said, well, I don't want to write, but he's got to come back, and he insists on writing. I said, well, then have him come back and write. He says, but, you know, those other guys are idiots. He says, well, that's what I thought. So anyway, but what was the question?
The question was, Jack's influence on other artists.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was profound, but it was kind of indirect. And when he came back, I remember he was talking about sharing was all I'm all about in some interview that was in Foon or Marvel Mania. And, you know, Gil used to say, I don't think it was right, but Gil said, what are you talking about? Sharing is all I'm about. Jack wouldn't tell you what kind of pencil he used. But I think Jack, you know...
Jack didn't know what kind of pencil he used.
Yeah, right. Because I don't think Jack was really interested in teaching anybody. If he did any teaching or telling anybody, it was because the person asked for it or Stan asked him. Because, you know, he didn't feel he should be teaching somebody else because then he's teaching to be Jack Kirby. And he didn't want to teach people to be Jack Kirby. And he didn't feel, you know, good. He was just himself and they could all draw their kind of things. But what he did teach them was how to do an exciting story. And John Buscema and these others benefited tremendously from that. If you couldn't get it all by osmosis, well, John Romita worked over on a couple of Daredevils and got it. John Buscema talked to him a little and looked at it. All of a sudden, his stories, you know, just became lively. Stan never really wanted anybody to have to draw like Jack. He just wanted that excitement. I guess the guy who looked the least like him was probably Gene Colan. And Stan loved his work as long as it was exciting and full, and that's all he was looking for. I think Jack felt he had done the Fantastic Four. You know, just like Ditko wouldn't do Spider-Man again.
Well, Ditko wouldn't do Spider-Man again because he felt he'd been screwed over on things they promised him on that character. Jack didn't want to go back to Fantastic Four in the 70s because he didn't want to go back to anything. Jack didn't want to go backward on anything he did. He wanted to create new characters, but also he wanted to be left alone. He wanted to do books. If you did Fantastic Four, you had to cross over with everything. And also Marvel did not feel that disposed towards taking whoever was on Fantastic Four at the time, it may have been you, off. Captain America was without a creative team. Fantastic Four was not, so they put him on that. They didn't really want to have Jack write Fantastic Four. He wanted either, Jack's deal was essentially either I write it myself or somebody else gives me a full script. I'm not going to plot and have somebody else dialogue.
Yeah, because I offered him, somewhere in the middle 70s when I became the writer, I called up Jack and I offered him to do the Fantastic Four. And I knew that Jack, you know, didn't want to, you know, get involved in some way with the way he had with Stan. He felt Stan maybe had grabbed too much of the credit, this and that, so he didn't want to do that. But I had figured out a way in advance, and I thought it would work. I said, look, Jack, you know, we'll talk it over, but I'll sort of let you do a lot of the plotting, you know, and everything. And I don't think we ever got around to discussing the long-term arrangement, but, you know, we'd worked that all out. I said, and since you'll be doing the plot, you can say your name first and my name second, this and that. And I thought maybe I had it work because his name would even come first. And, you know, I'd be the editor as well. But, you know, I was probably going to be much more likely to accept what Jack did than Stan would. I wouldn't have made these changes because I wouldn't have wanted to tee Jack off. And, you know, and of course, Stan never noticed he was doing it, I think. So, but the thing is, Jack said, well, I'll do it as long as you'll break it down panel by panel for me. And I said, well, you know, if I do that, I may have to let somebody else do it. So we sort of, you know, but I was really disappointed that all we ever got was the, out of that whole period was the, what if the Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four, and he double-crossed me on that one. But he came out better. Right? The idea was for me to be Johnny Storm, you know, and Flo to be it. But he made Saul Brosky the torch instead. It was much better because Saul was around at that stage where I wasn't, so it was actually a good decision.
Yeah. Jack had reached the stage. In the 70s, I think he had reached, in 1970, he was having trouble working Marvel method. It didn't work for him creatively because he couldn't separate the writing and the penciling in his mind. You know, people used to say to Irving Berlin, which do you do first? Do you write the lyrics or do you write the music? Because he did both. And Irving Berlin would say, neither. I write a song. The music and the lyrics come together. So when Jack was doing any comic in his history, he basically wrote it in his head. He wrote every panel out and what they people said. And then along comes somebody else to write dialogue. And the problem becomes if the person writes something very close to what Jack did, then Jack feels, my God, somebody else is getting the writer credit and money for my work. If the person deviates completely, well, he didn't like that either because he thought, that's not what the person's supposed to say. The picture doesn't now match the dialogue. So he had reached a stage where it didn't really work for him on a personal level. It also didn't reach this work for him on a monetary level, because he had discovered, the term he used was filling in the balloons, that the people treated the guy who filled in the balloons as the writer, period, and gave him no credit for the plots. When Jack went over to DC in 1970, a prominent writer in the comic book field wrote Jack this long letter which essentially said, I want to be your Stan Lee at DC. Send me the first issue and I'll dialogue it. Send me the first issue and I'll write it. You just go ahead and draw the first issue and send it to me and I'll write it, and I won't change a thing you do. And Jack thought, oh, you're going to be the writer of a book that you're going to have no input into the plots, no input into the characters. I'm going to decide what everybody says in every panel, and you're going to be the writer? Well, that didn't work for him for obvious reasons either. So the system just didn't play. So when he went to DC, he put in his contract, either somebody else would be the writer, period, would write everything, or he would be the writer, and the two would not mix. And that's kind of the way he tried to keep it the rest of his life, and the few times he deviated from that, he wasn't very happy. It didn't work for him creatively. So, anyway. Joe, would you, I know you've answered this question many times, but would you take us through the process, again, because people are interested in this. You go to your mailbox, the man hands you a package, you open it up, and there's the new Fantastic Four. What's the first thing you do? It's all penciled, it's all lettered. What do you do?
Well, the first thing, every page I ever got from Jack, I was in awe of. Especially when I did the Fantastic Four #5, I couldn't believe it. I had never seen the book. I didn't even know they existed. And I said, gee, there's something special here. You know, back in those days, Stan was always trying something new, and we never expected anything, even Spider-Man. We never expected things to materialize like they did. And even the Fantastic Four, I'm sure. But when I saw those characters, I said, gee, this is really something special. You know, at that time, we were so used to doing the monster books and whatever, that Stan, as you know, was always looking for a new trend to, you know, make some money for Marvel. And but when I saw the Fantastic Four #5, especially Jack's, I had done a few little things with Jack previous to that, a couple of monster books, I think. And but in any case, the characters were so great. I just couldn't wait to get into inking the story #5. You had Dr. Doom, of course, and it was just terrific. But Mark, every time that I got Jack's pages, even right up to the time he left the Fantastic Four, I was always in awe, and you couldn't wait to open up his packages. And once in a great while, there were little things you had to change, but that was only normal. And Stan expected it, because Stan called me one time and he said, Joe, he said, whatever you're doing, keep doing. He said, we like what you're doing on the Fantastic Four. So I would add a little bit here and there, but then that was early on, and then it got to a point where I said to myself, you know, it's not being fair to Jack. So I started inking Jack more like Jack had penciled, because you know, originally I would draw. I'd say to myself, gee, Jack doesn't know how to draw ears. I'll give him an Alex Raymond ears, you know, how ears should really look. But of course, then it wasn't Kirby. Kirby had a way, as we know, with his muscles. They didn't exist the way he drew them, but it certainly told the story. And everything Jack did was so dynamic that you didn't have to change a bit, actually. And although we couldn't help but change a little bit here, a little bit there, and a little bit here, a little bit there. And I think all the things that I did with Jack, I think if I did anything, it was, I enhanced Jack's work a little bit, made it a little slicker, and a lot of people liked the period that I was working with Jack, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But then again, they were great characters. I mean, the Silver Surfer, the Inhumans. That was a great period that Stan was writing and creating these great characters. So it was a great period to be working with Jack, and I'm glad I was a part of it, really.
Yeah, gotcha.
I just want to make one more thing before I take off. And I was thinking, there's only one. I don't think that many people, at least that went through that period, thought that anybody except Joe Sinnott was the best inker. Jack had for almost anything. There's only one other person I think who could have perhaps rivaled him, and whose work I liked about as much whenever I saw it, but there was very little of it, and that was Jacoya, who, when he would do those two Captain Americas they did, it was different. It was probably a little closer to Jack. The only problem was if Ramita was good as that, but if Frank had been able to ignore a little bit, he could have done the books that Joe didn't do and everything. But unfortunately, he was just never organized enough to do that. So we were really lucky in having such wonderful inkers. But even Vinnie Coletta, everybody dumps on. I mean, the readers just loved it. Of course, it was Jack, but somehow or other, that had a different approach, and that looked great. But Joe and Frank were the guys. Anyway,
I think that's one other guy, Bill Everett. did a wonderful job.
yeah, Gil always thought he was one of the best.
Yes.
We did a couple of Thors. Bill Everett.
Would
Yeah.
you thank Roy Thomas for spending this time with us?
No, the llamas are all dead.
Oh, they really?
Yeah, I still got pigs and cattle.
Oh, boy.
Thank you, Roy. All right, now,
He said they're all dead.
They catch diseases from the deer.
You're supposed to feed them, Roy.
They're supposed to feed them,
all
right?
right, I'm going to go to questions from the audience in a moment, but first, Joe, I want you to tell me now, you get a package of Jack's mail, you open it up, it's an issue of Fantastic Four. What is the very first thing you do? You read the story first?
Never.
Never, get to the mic.
No, I never read a Fantastic Four story. Can you believe that? I didn't have to. I mean, Jack told everything in pictures, and but really, I worked on, I don't know how many. Mark could tell you. He's 200. Yeah, I never read one Mark.
All right, you're surrounded by marks. Okay, now, you sit down at your drawing table. Do you start on the first page? Do you start on the last page? Do you start on the most interesting page?
No, I would start on page 2. I always did the splash page last because, a number of reasons. I wanted to get into the story, the characters, and in fact, I heard you talking about Jack's covers before. I always thought that Jack did better splashes than he did covers. I mean, he did some tremendous covers, but Jack's splashes, I can't remember any that were just the greatest, Even if there was nothing going on, his splashes were just terrific. But, I'd start number 2, 3, 4, right up, not necessarily in order, but I did, the only thing I did hold off, and I did the splash last.
And you start on page 1, 2, panel 1. You take the entire panel and then go to panel 2.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't work from, those days I used an awful lot of brush. I didn't have to use too much pen. Like when you're using pen, you have to work on 2 pages at once because you let one dry while you're working on the other. But when you work with a brush, you can do the whole page actually, and just maybe a little touch up here or there with the pen. But I would start. I start at the bottom of the page, so I would smear the top panels. I'd ink up to the bottom panels, and then the next row of panels, then the top row. Because if you start at the top, panel 1, 2, and 3, so to speak, you would smear it, maybe it ruin some of the detail that you may be having a problem following later on.
Did you ever smear?
Pardon me?
Smear?
Do you ever smear anything?
Oh, sure. What's worse than dropping ink on the work?
Marie Severman once told, she thought it was a bug crawling on top of the page. She went to wipe it off. It was a drop of ink that was instead the whole smear the whole page. Still the bug.
There's nothing worse than dropping ink on. It was not so bad drawing it on the artwork, but to drop it on the lettering,
That was really bad.
Yeah. The Marie Severin used to, in the office, have a bottle of disappearing ink. And she would, every so often, when an artist was in the office and he had spent a lot of time on a page, she would spill disappearing ink on the page in front of him. Oops, I'm sorry. And watch them scream and cry and rant and stuff like that. Joe, when the original art size changed from 12 by 18 to 10 by 15, did it make your life easier or more difficult?
A little more difficult. In fact, I didn't think Jack would be able to adhere to the smaller size, but he did.
Did you change tools because of it? Did you get
Well,
a
a lot of Jack's style was really lost though when he went to the smaller pages, because his panels, even if he had a head, it was like a splash panel, and Jack loved the big pages. I know that, and we did some great panels together. But the small stuff, he adjusted to it. But I always felt his work was never the same, Mark, after that, you know? It was still great, but those big pages, what, do you recall, what was the last one?
It's like FF number 72 or 74,
That's right,
around in there, somewhere in there, yeah. The difference is most obvious on Captain America. I think the very first thing that Jack did was a Captain America story. There's one issue of Captain America that is all heads. It's a story that Dr. Tales is suspense. And the lines are very thick on it, the lettering's very large, and I think it was the first one they did. If you ever want to see an example of how the original art size changed artists, look at Spider-Man Annual number 5 by Larry Lieber and Mike Esposito. The first 20 pages were drawn the large size, the last 20 pages were drawn the small size. And you can suddenly see in the middle of the book, the whole storytelling technique changes, and suddenly it's big panels and big heads.
What was the number?
Spider-Man Annual number 5.
5.
Of course, the worst thing that could happen to an artist is to get some of the writers who thought they were writing War and Peace, you know. Really, they wouldn't leave any room for the art. But Stan was good that way. He kept things to a minimum, I always felt. And the artist appreciates that, because the artist wants as much drawing space as possible. And I'm sure Kirby wanted that's for sure.
Why did they change the size of it?
Why did they change the size? Oh, this is kind of technical. You know what we're talking about here? They changed the original art. Prior to 1968, all comics were drawn 12 by 18, and then after most of them. And afterwards, it was 10 by 50. This was invented by Murphy Anderson, in case you're interested. Chemical Color Plate was doing all the color separations for both DC and Marvel at the time, this company. When the pages were 12 by 18, they had the following problem. Comic books presses accommodate 4 pages at a time. It's called a flat. It's 4 pages, and then they fold it over, and then they fold it again, they trim it again. But they have this, as far as the printer is concerned, he's printing sections of 4 pages. When the pages were 12 by 18, they wouldn't fit under the stat camera, all 4 of them at the same time. So they put 2 under the stat camera, photograph them, strip up the negative, put 2 more under the stat camera, photograph them, and they take the negatives and paste them together, reduce them, and combine them to make a negative that had 4 pages on it. When they went down to 10 by 15, it was possible to lay the 4 pages under the stat camera at once, and with one film, one step, shoot the whole thing. That meant that, first of all, what was being printed was 2 generations less, because they were taking, the artwork was going directly to the negatives, opposing to the artwork going to a couple of inner negatives, and also because the artwork was going to, there's fewer steps, so it cost less money to do that. Did I explain that so it makes any sense at all here? Anyway, so Murphy Anderson did an issue of the Spectre for Showcase, since he was lettering it, since he was inking it himself. He said, I want to try drawing smaller. Can I draw this small? And DC said, fine. And he drew an issue of Showcase, the Spectre, 10 by 15, and it was handled. And the people at Chemical Color Play called up DC and said, hey, that's great. If you did all your books that way, you could save, $1.10 a month or something like that. And in the history of comics back then, there was never a case of, oh no, let's not do that. It makes the books, if it's cheaper, we do it. Paper can be cheaper, we do it. The printer plates can be cheaper, we do it. And all of a sudden, that was cheaper. And it also saved money on postage and mailing the pages around. And it made it possible for artists to buy smaller portfolio cases.
The first artist that I saw, when I remember always the big pages, the first piece of art was that size, that was 10 by 15, was a John Severin story. Now, John Severin, I guess, worked well because he put a lot of lines down, and it didn't lose anything in that size either, reducing it that size. And from what I recall, that was the first piece of art I saw at that particular size. Remember the big size, and I figured that was it. And then the small size came along, and I don't think it cut the time element in drawing it or whatever. And the bottle of ink probably was 40 cents anyway at that time, so it doesn't matter how much ink you're buying. But again, it was a very easy transition. My stuff, when I started drawing the teenage, was the small size. No. Of course that was that was. Building the model, I had hundreds of pages in the house in the large size. And I look at that, and I look at, it seemed like something out of the Dark Ages, but I did, drew them, and not even thinking of anything getting smaller or larger. Then I saw Severin's pages coming in small size, and then we all kind of went that way. And it was fine.
People in the back, we can hear you up here. John Severin drew the stories he did for the EC Two-Fisted Tales, almost printed size. I have the originals to one of them. The big thing is Ben Oda managed to correct his lettering size so it fit perfectly. You can't tell in the printed book. Jack Davis did the Rawhide Kid stories did for Marvel, 10 by 50. He was the first guy I knew at Marvel to do it. I don't know why. Since he was inking it himself, they let him do it. But it became the standard size of 68 for everybody. And people like Joe Russell do it. What would you like to ask, sir? Yes?
I was going to ask for a time as why he moved more Weisinger.
I think everybody who worked on Mort Weisinger was miserable for including Mort Weisinger. Mort was, you know the phrase self-loathing Jew. If you look at the dictionary, go ahead.
I'd like to ask Mr. Goldberg, can you describe the process and how exactly did you go about making the decision to color the whole green?
Yes.
Color the whole.
How did you decide to make the Hulk green?
Well, we all know that it was gray at first,
Right.
and I think that might have been the first time that maybe Stan suggested that I said it was not a good color. It was the worst color used. The next worst color is the brown because you get a lot of different colors that make up the grays and the greens, and it's not even an equal amount of blue, an equal amount of yellow, and red. So it's the worst color to use on a character that's going to be your main character for 32 pages. But it didn't work. I'm sure if you pick up, you'll see little red tones coming through, yellow coming through, whatever. It wasn't good. And I think it was just one issue of him gray, and then he died, and then about 6 months later, the green character came out. I kind of forget about that. He got
No, it was the next issue. It was the second issue.
It was still gray?
Yeah. No. The first issue was gray, and the second issue was green.
Was the same logic true on Iron Man?
Iron Man was yellow at front, then was the real.
Gray in the first issue.
Well, iron is gray, so that's why we weren't too creative. I did what we had to do. I rolled up to a yellow piece of iron, you know.
But Stan, what he wants to do is you decided to make the Hulk green. You suggested green.
Yeah, it was because we were kind of limited, and we really were limited in those days on color. If you just quickly look at all the books. The superheroes are red, yellow, and blue. Every one of the superheroes are red, yellow, and blue. And the bad guys were magenta, burnt umber, green, gray. They were green. It wasn't one of the Fantastic Four. There was a green big head. The Watcher. Isn't the Watcher gray? The Watcher. Let's go. See that? See? I'm glad you asked me up to talk about the coloring. You guys know more than I will ever. Because it was getting the books in and getting the books out, and basically, hopefully getting it right. Look, there's many times when I was doing Milligan modeling, maybe I paid a little bit more attention to coloring more of the model because I drew it. But I would get the book back, and I went to the name of the company that is Chemical Color, that did the coloring. I used to go there once a month to check things out. They would buy us lunch, and I still don't know what the hell they were talking about. But then I would get the book. We got to put proofs back on the covers all the time, so that was great. We were able to correct it. The insides I never got back. And they would see Millie the model with brown hair, or she would get red hair, and Joey would get blonde hair. So, and that would, it was a room full of people in a room, and I remember the separators, or I think they were getting $12 a week, and what are you going to yell at somebody making $12 a week? So it happened, and it sold, and people would complain, I would get letters, and then you went on to the next book, and everybody, 50% sales one month, the next month goes to 25%, and you come in and you have one less book to draw. And that's what the history is of comic books.
I read somewhere that there was an issue that the reason colors like brown were not chosen for the whole was because of fears that it would be seen as some type of racial stereotype. Is there any truth to that?
I know the greatest description of color. Remember, you all know Bill Malden, the great artist in the Second World War, the combat artist. He stayed alive for the rest of his life because he fought General Patton. He fought everybody. But he once came up to speak and he said, "This guy could draw mud better than anybody else." And what would you, if you were coloring that, what would you make it? If Stan and I were doing it, to make it stand out, we would make it yellow and red and blue, because he figured that's going to attract some young kid's attention to buy the book. He was never, certainly we were all conscious of making it authentic. You know, these guys drew, Jerry Robinson was the best guy in making things authentic. And I went to the public library in 42nd Street and got all the color schemes down and marked them down. I started doing it, and sometimes they would come out, and it was bad. So Stan says, well, there's one thing to do, just kind of throw that out the window to get as close as possible. But I'm just exaggerating, but if you can make enough red tanks fighting yellow tanks, I'd be very happy. Because that's we put them on a newsstand. There was DC Gooding, these great rule books, coloring by very authentic colors, and my red and yellow tanks were selling better than their books.
You mentioned that the Hulk, that villains were often colored things like green and whatnot. Was the Hulk seen, at least initially, as a villainous character by you or by Stan?
Well, he was. Well, you guys could help me out. I can't help you out. I know there was another monster. That's about it. The Fantastic Four, he was naturally, he broke away from that red color. We made him orange. So that's about it.
Let's say we're going to have time for about 3 more questions over here, gentlemen.
When Jack did the edit the photos, the little photo collages, I'm not a Jack Kirby expert. I'm not sure if he had been doing something like that all along. He just started doing that in the 60s. What was the reaction at Marvel when that stuff started coming in? How did you work around that?
Well, Joe worked on that in the sense that there were pages where Jack did these collages, so you just have to do a few figures.
Oh, I didn't like them at all, Mark. Really. I didn't like them at all. I don't know why he just didn't draw them, you know? Because they didn't reproduce well. Right, Stan?
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. Not the other.
Very muddy.
Came out muddy. Yeah.
Jack was always trying to urge Marvel to go into something fancier with the package, better printing, more deluxe things. And he had this idea about doing comics and photo collage. In fact, at one point, he had this idea that the negative zone in Fantastic Four was kind of created to be a world of photo collage at one point. And it was an experiment. It was something Jack liked to do to unwind, to do the collages. They're wonderful in person. They just never looked good in printed books. And it's one of the many projects he had he never managed to take to its realization. Yes, sir. Yes.
2-part question. Did Jack ever comment to you, looking back, how his style evolved and changed over the years? And when he came back, in the second part, is when he came back to Marvel in the mid-70s, did Stan say, Jack, your style, can you go back and draw it more like you did in the, whenever, late 60s?
Okay, the first part of the question, I didn't hear it, was, did Jack ever comment to me about how his style evolved over the years? The answer is no. Jack thought his style was the same all the time. Second question was, did Stan ask Jack to go back in the 70s? I don't believe he did. I believe that they were just so happy to have him back and functioning that they didn't really Jack was having eye problems at the time, and Marvel was aware of it. Some of the changes in his artwork that happened in the 70s were a result of eye problems. So they weren't necessarily something he could have corrected. He also wasn't very happy to be back there working for Marvel again. So, gentleman back here, yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just in the 60s, the covers of Marvel Comics had a very different coloring characteristic to them, very rich, lots of tones, very different from the inside coloring, the way it printed. around 69, 70, the covers just sort of went flat color again. So the FF costumes are just light blue, none of that rich purplish tone to them, Spider-Man 2. I'm wondering what happened production-wise. It had such a big change in the covers.
I don't think. I started coloring in 1949 to 1850, and I think I stopped coloring them in 1958 or 59. I was called in to do some special new things that were coming up, things that had to be colored, and they would shoot right from my color that was on the paper. There wasn't an indication that I followed exactly what I did. I was able to do a lot of rendering on those particular books. There was a couple of G.I. Joe special big books that had to be colored a certain way. But all the other stuff, I was busy doing other things, and it was fine. When Danny Crespi would call me in to do something, and money was good. That's the bottom line in anything. And you get $75 to color this, but they're going to shoot right from the color. So I had to be very careful. And you do 2 pages a day if you're lucky, and coloring a book, I could color 2 books in one day. It was like an indication. So it's
You know, something in the printing press, change printers or whatever.
There was a change in the printing.
Exactly. But I've seen the books, and they look great. The colors were super later on. But all these years, I remember, just why didn't I have that when I was a color? It was great.
In '68, World Color Press made a strong urge, a strong press to, no pun intended, to get all the comic book printing business in the country. They even underpriced. Western Publishing was printing Gold Key comics themselves, and World Color went to Western and underbid them as their own printers and took over printing the Gold Key.
Eastern Color in Gary in Connecticut was doing it.
Yeah, and it all changed the World Color Press.
Yeah, that did.
And you know, which was fine until about mid-70s when their presses started to break down. They weren't going to replace them. So anyway, we got to have 1 or 2 more questions. Barry?
When I saw Hellboy 2, they go on an island and I see a stone man, which I always think of Jack. But you can't see Star Wars, for example, without seeing Doctor Doom, Orion, and Darkseid, even the name. Did Jack ever say anything about that he saw his properties being lifted?
Yeah, Jack didn't charge plagiarism so much as like, I found gold and somebody else exploited it. I knew this was a good idea. Damn it, I wish I had been able to get it to the right venue in time. Now when he saw Star Wars, he didn't run around and walk out of Star Wars thinking, they to rip me off. He walked out of Star Wars thinking, gee, I knew that was a great material. I wish I'd been able to do that. I should have done that movie. Or somebody should have let me do that movie.
Yeah, to dwell on that, I just quickly, because it's a perfect analogy to your story. And this is just fascinating. We all know Roy Lichtenstein, and his war pictures that he stole right out of combat comics, and his romance pictures with Brad and Cobra, the girl's name. And they had a marvelous movie at the Guggenheim, a documentary on his life a number of years ago, which almost took over the whole museum. And it was a great film that was shown, this documentary there, and there was a studio in Washington Street in the Village, and a big studio with a big, long picnic table like this, long table. There was a gang of stuff on the table, and the guy was interviewing and talking. And we all know where he was inspired and what he looked at and what this pop culture that he was part of. But they asked him, what do you look at? And he said, these were the exact words, because I own the video. And he said, I'll tell you where I swiped from. There's, again, this big long table and a big pile of books, and he was definitely looking for something very specific. Couldn't find it, and he finally found something underneath this pile. The hand came out with the book, and it was a Millie, the model book that I had drawn. The camera went onto this book, it took over the whole screen, and somebody was turning the pages on the big full screen. And it was my book, done in a realistic pop art style, my sense of, not like John Romita's realism, he's so great at it, but it's my interpretation of that. And it worked for a number of years. And he saw something in there, and he just copied that. Now, there's a lot of Jack artists out there that have looked at his stuff day in and day out. There's something that always comes through that's there's Jack. There's Jack's work. And I'm sure he realized that when he was working, and that's fine. some people get upset about it, and you can't copyright something like that. I sit back and I look at those situations. I've seen that film on the first time, and I've showed it a number of times. Some people get very upset, and unfortunately, it's not too many of the artists, but the artists' wives. Because it's, on this particular video, just quickly, it starts off at an auction at Sotheby's, and one of his paintings were going, I think, for $7 million. And that was the start. And it's worth, since he died, it was for millions and millions of dollars. But I felt really good about that for a number of reasons I wouldn't even want to go into. I was very honored that he chose mine, and I corresponded with him. We had some letters back and forth. And I went on, and the end of the story is he's dead and I'm alive.
That is about as good a way to end this thing as I can think of. Would you join me in thanking Mr. Stan Goldberg?